Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Chris Peterson. My current job, I'm the farm manager for a project at Alpha Omega Veteran Services. This is a picture of two of our guys. So we're a 2-acre urban farm in South Memphis near the airport at a housing facility for Alpha Omega Veteran Services. So that site houses about 45 formerly homeless veterans. All of them deal with some sort of physical or mental disability, and most of them have a history of substance abuse. And so the facility exists to help them get back on their feet and back into the working world. There are 5 Alpha Omega sites around Memphis, so we house about 150 veterans total. So we use the farm as an opportunity to provide them with fresh produce, to provide them with jobs and job skills training, and to do horticultural therapy. So I work with a team of 3 there to do that work. So I've been doing food work in some form or fashion for all of my professional career to date. My background is actually in academic philosophy. So I went to undergraduate here in Memphis at Christian Brothers and went away to London and finished my master's in human values and global ethics, and came back and have been doing on-the-ground work in addition to continuing to write about and teach at Rhodes and CBU and some other places. So served as executive director of an organization called Grow Memphis for 3 years, and then for 4 years ran a small farm about an hour outside of Memphis, and then just recently, back in February, moved back to take charge of this project. So been doing this for quite some time. So I'm going to talk a little bit generally about the food system and why I think it's important, a little bit about some other initiatives in addition to my project that are promising or going on in Memphis, and then a little bit more in detail about what we do and how we do it and why we do it. If anybody has any questions at any point along the way, I'm happy to be interrupted, or you can save questions to the end. It doesn't really matter that much to me. So again, thank you for having me. I think it's important to spend a little bit of time thinking about why local food matters. So these are 2 quotes that I picked that are important to me. So the first comes from the author Wendell Berry's essay, The Pleasures of Eating, in which he writes, "Eating is an agricultural act." So eating is one of those things that most of us don't put too much thought into. Even someone like me who spends all my time in food, a lot of times very quickly just grabbing whatever is around to be full. But in his essay, Wendell Berry really focuses on the ways in which every time we eat, what we decide to eat says something about what type of food system that we want, right? So one of the things that got me interested in food generally is that food production is a very interesting intersection of a lot of different types of social justice issues. So, according to Mr. Berry, when we decide what we're going to eat, we're not just deciding on the particular food, but also what type of practices we're endorsing in relation to the environment, how we want to treat the people that are producing our food, and what type of communities we want to live in. And so I want to think about food in that larger context. Certainly where I come from, my philosophical background is making those connections with what we decide to eat. And the second comes from the British farmer and researcher Sir Albert Howard, which says that we should treat the whole problem of health in soil, plant, and animal as one great subject, right? So we can't really have a conversation about one of those things without having a conversation about all of them. And I just want to give a sort of a brief sort of background and history of the food system and what I mean by that. So I spent 4 years in rural America, in rural Tennessee, and it got me really interested in thinking about farming, not just small-scale farming that I've been involved in, but also the larger system of food production. And so I put together this slide of what farming in America has looked like historically. So in 1869, nearly half of the U.S. population was involved in some form or fashion in agriculture, and that has steadily decreased to modern day. So now it's less than 1% of the population. So for a while, you actually see in 1916, the percentage of people involved in agriculture is dropping. The total number of people involved in agriculture is actually going up. And what you see at the middle of the century, especially after the Second World War, is not only the total number of people decline, but the percentage as well. So there are fewer and fewer people involved in agriculture, but at the same time, the amount of acreage and cultivation in the United States has more than tripled, right? So you have fewer and fewer people managing more and more acreage, and the results of that has been not just the degradation of land, but also the degradation of farmer livelihood. So you have this counterintuitive system where these farms are getting bigger, but the farmers that are farming it are actually not the ones benefiting from the system. So I heard a statistic last year at an agricultural conference. The median contribution to household income from farms of any size in 2018 was minus $1,500. So farmers of any size are not the ones benefiting from this great expansion of food production. And don't get me wrong, I mean, the amount of food that we're producing is greater than it ever has been before, but there have been some consequences for the environment and for the people that work the land. Right, so as Sir Albert Howard says, we have one big problem. So in the environment, our soils today hold roughly half of the amount of stored carbon they did due to intensive agricultural practices. This is largely due to tillage and runoff. Agriculture makes up about 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions and is the single largest contributor to biodiversity loss globally. A lot of that has been in the insect populations, right? So the loss of insect populations due to the advent of pesticides. At the same time, modern food today produces 10 to 25% less nutrients than it did in the past. Additionally, my generation is the first that's expected to live shorter lives than our parents. So we have the first generation to have shorter life expectancy, largely due to what we're eating, in addition to other factors like work and things like that. And then I'm sure many people are familiar with issues involving exploitation of migrant workers and loss of farming as a viable livelihood. It's not my intention to be depressing, but one thing that I think should also be pointed out, and is something that is very important to me in my job, is that there's also been a rash of farmer suicides in rural America that isn't being talked about. So farmers are the only demographic that have higher suicide rates than veterans. Obviously, this is a very important issue to me because we're dealing with the intersection of those two things. And so it's a fairly bleak picture of modern agriculture. Yes, so most of these are worldwide. So the statistics are all U.S.-based sources, but they're globally. So these statistics, after the Second World War, a lot of our agricultural practices in the U.S. and Europe were exported to India and China and places like that. So the statistics hold fairly consistently. There is some variation globally in how people produce food and how people eat, and so it will change some, but they hold worldwide. At the same time, and again, I'm painting with a little bit of a broad brush here, but there has been an explosion of knowledge sharing in sustainable agricultural practices that is really beginning to pick up steam. So I like to remind people that sustainable agriculture is nothing new. People like Sir Albert Howard and other folks like that, the Rodale Institute here in the United States, have been preaching the benefits of no-till farming and using compost instead of artificial fertilizers, since the day artificial fertilizers came on the market after World War II. But there's been an explosion of actual data gathering and research into this, and I don't have a ton of resources to show you here, but I can certainly pass them along. But to put it broadly, sustainable practices sequester carbon rather than emitting it. So the type of agriculture that I'm involved in, that I'll talk a little bit more about in detail, focuses on using cover crops and leaving live roots in the soil in order to actually keep carbon in the soil, so reduce the amount of tillage, the amount of soil carbon we're releasing into the atmosphere. Water retention is also a big issue. I'm sure all of you have been noticing how much rain we've gotten this year, right? So this is a big issue for agriculture. But agriculture could potentially be a very large solution to these flooding problems that we have because of healthy soils' water retention capacity. So for every 1% increase in organic matter, you increase your soil's water retention rate by 25,000 gallons per acre. So you can imagine if farms that use these practices ringed our cities, what flooding would look like. It would be a completely different type of thing. And you can see that. I don't know if anybody's driven through Arkansas or Mississippi recently and seen the flooding that we've had. when I drive through, that's what I see, is if more sustainable practices were adopted, the landscape might look completely differently. So Gabe Brown is a good example of this. He was a conventional farmer for his entire career up until the 1990s, when because of debt due to buying large equipment and pesticides and stuff like that, he was facing the possibility of failure on his family's cattle farm in the Dakotas. Just made sort of a Hail Mary to employ these sustainable practices that had promised to fix his problems. And what he saw, one of the first things he noticed was this water retention capacity. So in 1991, when they switched their production system, they had slightly less than 2% organic matter in their soil, and their water infiltration rate, so the rate at which water was absorbed into their soil, was about half an inch per hour. So today, his soils range from 5.5% to 6%, and he's got an infiltration rate of 8 inches per hour. Right, so his farm doesn't flood. Right? His farm collects water like a sponge. So you can imagine what it would be like if more of these farms were around. Sustainable farming also produces more nutrient-dense foods. For farmers, a lot of times it can cut out processing and middlemen that increase farmer shares of the profit, so things like community-supported agriculture, farmers markets, things like that. Restoration of farmland and natural landscapes, more humane treatment of animals, and importantly for me in my project, allows opportunities for dignified work. So there's a lot of different organizations locally working on sustainable food. So Memphis Tilth is an umbrella organization that some of you may be familiar with. So it incorporates my former organization, Grow Memphis, Bring It Food Hub, and a few others to be a larger voice for sustainable food practices in Memphis. Bring It Food Hub is a project under Memphis Tilth. So is anybody here a subscriber by chance to Bring It Food Hub? Jane, a couple of people may be familiar. So Bring It offers, they aggregate produce from local farmers and deliver a weekly bag of vegetables to their subscribers. So they provide much more revenue as a middleman than any other type of aggregator would, and focus on being able to do work that can be difficult for farmers to do, so reaching new customer bases that may not be familiar with it and having sort of convenient drop-off times for that produce, because it can be difficult for farmers, especially rural farmers, to get to town and make that food accessible, right? So one of the issues is that cheap food is very readily accessible, right? There's no shortage of it in grocery stores. And so they try to help with that convenience aspect as well. Yes? Oh, so there's a pickup place. That's fantastic. Yeah, so... Yeah, and so we sell regularly to Bring It as well. So we're one of the farms that Bring It purchases from, and they purchase from a lot of really, really great sustainable farms, which has allowed more people to go into farming, right? So there's only so many farms that can be successful at a farmer's market, which is the traditional way that small farms get started. And so things like Bring It allow for different types of sales opportunities for small producers. New South Produce Cooperative is a similar project that just came into Memphis. They've been operating in the Little Rock area for about a decade, but they do very similar work, so aggregating from small sustainable farms to sell to restaurants and big institutions and things like that. The Compost Ferry is another initiative that I've been involved in, so this is a fairly new project. So the Compost Ferry offers a subscription service for businesses and for households to they do a weekly collection of food scraps. So when you subscribe, it's like $20 a month or something like that for a household. They bring you a bucket with a liner for your food scraps to compost, and they come around once a week and pick it up and give you a clean bucket, right? So a lot of people I know get excited about composting, but get less excited about turning their compost in the middle of the summer when it stinks. And so they do that hard work for you and then focus on they do sell some of that to small farms, but also if you're a subscriber, you get a little bit of finished compost back twice a year from them. So they cut out your work on that front. Really great project that's kind of exploding in Memphis. And there's a number of other projects that are worth mentioning. So Greenleaf Learning Farm is an urban farm in South Memphis near us that focuses on youth in their neighborhood. Girls Inc. Youth Farm is a project run by Girls Inc. that focuses on young women's empowerment through agriculture. They're in North Memphis, in the Fraser area. there's a number of other urban farms that I can't go too much into, and dozens and dozens of community gardens have sprouted over the past decade. So a lot of my work when I moved back from London was in starting community gardens, and we started about 60 over 3 years. There's also a number of farmers markets, right? So other sustainable food organizations, the Cooper Young Community Farmers Market, so my farm sells there, Memphis Farmers Market, and a number of other opportunities throughout the week to get access to fresh produce. So that's just a really quick overview. I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about what we do. All right, so here's sort of a picture. So when I started last year, in February, our farm in South Memphis was just an idea. So that's a Google Earth shot of how we literally designed the farm. It was just an open Bermuda grass field. And over the course of the year, we laid out our beds and got started with some raised beds, and then our in-ground planting in structures like greenhouses. We also have a small chicken flock and beehives on the site as well. So the way we farm is a model pioneered by a gentleman in Canada named Jean-Martin Fortier, which focuses on small-scale tools. So we have a small walk-behind two-wheeled tractor that we use, and everything else is basically done with hand tools. So you can see in the picture in the middle at the top, we use these large tarps to kill weeds before we plant. So we don't do any spraying of weed killers or anything like that. We use these large tarps, which kill the weeds and encourage earthworms to sort of help us till the soil, so they come up and are attracted by the tarps. And then we use permanent in-ground raised beds. So we build these beds with the tractor once and basically maintain them with the tarping and by hand for the duration. And so what that means is we reduce the amount of times we have to till. So we basically tilled once and built the beds and just really use human ingenuity to keep it going. How does the raised beds work? So what I'm talking about is the ones in the middle, and I'll see if I have a better picture. They're 30 inches wide by 50 feet long, and so we build these with our walk-behind tractor, basically kick up the soil on the sides of the beds to create a 4 to 6 inch in-ground raised bed. And then we keep the weeds off of them by, when we're not using them, we keep them covered with the silage tarps, and so that keeps the weeds from growing. So when we're ready to plant them, we have an implement for our tractor called a power harrow, which just sifts the top inch of soil and creates a nice place for us to plant, but it doesn't go very deep. It doesn't disturb the worm population. It doesn't disturb the roots as they're decomposing or anything like that, but just gives us a platform to seed or to put plants in. And then when we're ready to get rid of a crop, when we're done with it, we have a mower that fits on the back of the tractor that mows. So most mowers cut off like this, right? They cut off grass like this. Ours has blades that goes two ways, so it actually mulches whatever was there previously. And we cover that back up, and over the winter, that crop residue decomposes back into the soil. So we never actually have to till more than that inch down, which creates a really powerful ecosystem for soil bacteria and for earthworms and things like that. So there's a number of small-scale tools that enable us to do that. So we have what's called a flame weeder, which looks like a giant torch that we use if the weeds do grow up. So we can germinate weeds in the bed before we use them and go burn them off the top with this thing. But it doesn't burn past the top half inch of the soil. So most of these tools have been around in European agriculture, where the scale of land available is just smaller for 50 years or so, and are just now sort of coming into the United States. So that's how most of it works.
You're totally organic.
We're certified naturally grown. Certified naturally grown is a farmer-to-farmer certification that's like the National Organic Program. The main difference is that we're inspected by other farmers rather than by the government. It's also a little bit cheaper, but it's a farmer-to-farmer knowledge sharing in addition to being policing. So I'm required to have somebody come out and inspect my farm every year, and then I'm required to go out and inspect somebody else's farm. But certified naturally grown tends to adopt a adopt new practices much faster than the organic program. So, for instance, some of you may have seen like the black plastic on farm fields that people use. There's been a biodegradable form of that in Europe since the mid-1970s that the National Organic Program has yet to adopt because it has to go through Congress, it has to go through a period of national public comment and all this stuff. Certified naturally grown basically can look at the science and then can poll their farmers in order to adopt those new practices. So it's just a little bit more flexible for smaller folks like me. But yeah, we don't use any pesticides we use are biologically based, but we have an integrated pest management plan. We don't really spray stuff. So this is a little bit more from last year. So you see our greenhouse. It's Ed Carlock, who's our main gardener on site, Becca Hart, my coworker. And then you can see a little bit of our farm in the winter and us putting in a small orchard. So the farm has got about a third of an acre of plantable space. It's got a 20 fruit tree orchard and 30 each blueberry and blackberry bushes, a chicken coop, beehives. And then we have what we call the wellness garden, which is a sensory garden for the residents that live on site. So it focuses on native planting, attracting pollinators, birds, and things like that, just a kind of a quiet place for the guys to sit and reflect. And then we hope to offer organized horticultural therapy at that space in the future. So yeah, it's a fairly small farm, right? So we actually grow on a third of an acre, even though we manage 2 acres. This is our season last year. So last year we focused on infrastructure development. So we only farmed in the fall. So we didn't farm spring or summer last year. But you can see kind of we're able to produce a lot in a small place. So we produced just over 3,000 pounds of food last year. About half of that went to the clients. So the way our farm works is about 50% of what we grow goes directly back to the clients for free. So we have a free CSA for clients, for the residents that have their own kitchens. And then a couple of the Alpha Omega housing facilities have chefs on site, and so we offer them bulk produce, cabbage or lettuce, tomatoes, things like that. So 100% of the residents that we work with have access to our produce. And then the other half we sell through things like Bring It and at the farmers market in order to be able to hire residents to work with us. So we try to create jobs on the farm for guys that are interested. Obviously, not everybody is super duper interested in working outside this time of year when it's hot and then sometimes rainy. But for the guys that are really passionate about it, we do. So we have on our staff Ed, who is in that picture, who works with us every day. My coworker Becca has a farm apprentice this year named Troy who lives in transitional housing. So he's a younger guy living in one of our transitional housing facilities. And so in addition to working for us on the farm, we're connecting him to educational opportunities, so farm business opportunities throughout the community to learn more about what he's doing. We have a gentleman in his 80s who is our staff chicken keeper. So he's legally blind and mostly deaf, but he's our chicken keeper. And we have a guy who was the picture at the beginning that works with us at the farmers market and also in the wash area. And then another guy who works with us in the greenhouse and also makes flower bouquets that we can sell at market. And so what we try to do is for guys that are interested, we find a way to make a job that meets their interests but also their physical abilities, because we're dealing with very hugely variable physical abilities on the farm. As much of our stuff as can be is ADA accessible for that reason, so we try to make things scooter friendly and wheelchair friendly, and things like that. But we've seen a lot of success in a very short time. So the dollar value of what we distributed to clients was about $5,600 last year, out of a total of about $10,000 worth of produce that we grew just in that one season. We also compost on site, so we composted about 850 pounds of food waste last year, capturing about 1,600 pounds of potential contamination. So this year, I don't have the data on the PowerPoint, but this year we're harvesting about 1,200 pounds of food per month. So we're on track to have beaten this like next week. So we're really excited. So we expect to be able to grow $50,000 to $60,000 worth of produce a year. Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. I have some slides on what we see in the clients. So this project was started as a partnership between Memphis Tilth and Alpha Omega Veteran Services. So Alpha Omega has tried to have gardens for years on the site without dedicated staff to do it. And so, they've had board members that were excited about it come out and plant a patch of okra or whatever, but never had like a real system for how the produce was going to be harvested or distributed amongst the clients or anything like that. And so when they were talking to one of their local funders, they said, oh, there's this group, Memphis Tilth, that does that and could probably provide the build-out. So Memphis Tilth built out basically a model saying, like, this is how much food we think we can produce. This is how we would set it up, and this is how we would staff it. Right? So it's modeled on Memphis. Memphis Tilth has a partnership with Advanced Memphis where they do this type of job, skills training with clients of Advanced Memphis. And basically we just adapted that to the needs of the Alpha Omega residents. So like I said, I work in a team of 3, so there's me, so I manage the farm, figuring out like how to grow more food in a small space and how best to lay things out to work with the clients. My colleague Becca Hart, who focuses on engagement with the clients, so she does a gardening class with clients and also connects people with other opportunities around the city. And then she works with Farron Levesque, who's our community kitchen coordinator, who teaches clients how to cook the food that we're growing. So they offer a gardening and cooking class every week. So that's sort of the model that we're using. So we haven't had any honey to sell to date. So we had some trouble with the bees last year just because of the way the farm got off the ground. We just didn't have a lot planted. And so we've been focused just on building them up, but we will be selling the honey once we have enough. It's always a challenge, a similar situation with the eggs that we produce is trying to make a decision about what is that with that valuable stuff, what is going to go to the clients and how much, and what is going to go to the public and how much. Because I don't want to have 2 separate systems. The clients get this and the community gets this. So we try to find ways to balance that, and I'm not sure how we're going to do that with the honey. Unless we can just produce a ton of it, but we're trying to figure it out. Yeah, so we have a couple of different types of evaluations that we do. One of the things is that we keep just a lot of hard data about everything we do. So we keep client hours down to, including volunteer hours, like who it was, what day, how many hours they were there. And that way we're able to track not just the total hours, but how many different clients are actually working on the farm. We track a ton of stuff about what we're producing and how much, and like I showed you, like what value of produce is being given to the clients. We do so in the class. Becca and Farron do a pre and post survey that collects some of that information about changes in eating habits and changes in sort of emotional behavior. But we're working on a way to do that at a larger scale. Probably at the end of our initial grant is for 3 years. And so we'll probably next year work on a larger, like sort of a big picture survey of how behavior has changed. But everything that we do is rooted in research about best practices for things like horticultural therapy. So I don't think we're inventing anything new, hopefully. So a lot of that stuff can be difficult to capture, though. That some of the more emotional benefit of the farm. You can't capture it just in the number of hours somebody spends out there. One of the things we're working on that front is Becca is working with a local person on that storytelling project that I mentioned briefly, which would be a way for guys to tell their stories of their lives and how the farm has sort of impacted them. So hopefully we'll kick that off next year.
And do you sell under a label at the farm? Is there something you could look for?
Yeah, so you could look for me, me and Jesse. So we're there at the farm. So we sell as AOVS Urban Farm. Either me, so Jesse's there every week. And then either me or Becca is there with him. But we're at the Cooper Young Farmers Market at First Congregational Church. So we're there every week. Our produce, you can see the sweet potatoes. Our produce looks very good. We take a lot of pride in what we do. So yeah, please come look for it.
Do you give tours?
We do, yeah. We're always happy to give tours. One of the nice things about being in town is that it's pretty easy for people who want to see it to come out. So we're like at Airways in 240. We're not too far. Our main source of funding. So we have 3-year startup funding from a local foundation, and then part of our funding comes from the produce that we sell, part of it from Alpha Omega's own fundraising, and then just ongoing grant writing and stuff like that. So, we're not going to be able to fund the whole project off of the farm, but we're trying to fund the farming operations off of it, and then go back to the public to ask for support for some of the stuff that it wouldn't be paid for, the therapeutic aspects, the classes. That's a good question. So how many of our veterans are able to move out and get employed? So there's 5 housing facilities in Memphis, and 3 of them, I think, or 2 of them, are focused on transitional housing. So the guys tend to stay there 2 weeks to 2 months to get back into the community. I don't honestly know what the rates are, but my understanding is that the people that go through that program, so they go through those sites, are either going to go back into the working world or into a long-term Alpha Omega housing facility. So some of the guys that are older and coming off the streets will end up at a permanent housing facility under Alpha Omega. But the younger guys do typically, they go through those transitional facilities, do go back to work and back into the community. A lot of them go to work for Alpha Omega. So Alpha Omega prides itself on being able to provide employment. So like the security, the drivers, the cooks, the social workers, like all those folks pretty much are Alpha Omega clients. And so a lot of them end up being employed through that. So our work to get guys, so in addition to like farm work, we're also looking at guys' employment in related fields. So, we're able to do like training in mechanics, right? They can learn to work on the tractor, which is then transferable to working as a mechanic. Farron's cooking class also includes a Serve Safe certification, which would then enable them to go work in restaurants. And so that's kind of where our focus is. But that's still very new for our project. Yes, I believe so. All of them. I'm not sure about New South. New South may be a for-profit business, but all of the rest of them, Compost Ferry, Memphis Health, are all 501c3s. Yeah, so it's hard for me. I'm kind of in the weeds of like what I want the farm to look like, so it can be a little bit difficult to express the bigger picture. We have a couple of goals. One is that we want to, on the farm, we're trying to move between this year and next year to full year-round production, right? So we want to be able to engage the guys year-round, in addition to having revenue year-round and operating the farm like that. And so we're working on putting up some high tunnels for overwinter production and things like that. So that's one of the goals is for the operation to be a fully year-round thing, which will enable us not just to employ guys year-round, but also make us more attractive to selling to local restaurants and stuff like that. So we're working on some partnerships on that front. And then, sort of one of the big pictures. So another goal is just to have more guys that we're able to employ, right? So I think we budgeted to be able to hire more guys than we've currently hired, just because it can take some time to find guys jobs that work. So we've had people. The reality of where we're working is that sometimes guys that have men and women, I shouldn't just say guys, because there are women that are housed there as well. My apologies. People relapse. It's a reality of what we do, and so we've had to deal with that challenge, right? Guys that work with us have relapsed and are not part of the program anymore. But so we want to be able to hire as many residents as want to work with us, basically. And then, another long-term project is that wellness garden that I spoke about. Basically, what we've done there to date is we've planted a canopy that's going to take 5 years to really be kind of shady and a nice place for people to sit. And so, as we develop that, and as we're able to turn that into the type of garden we want to be able to bring in more professional horticultural therapy opportunities than are currently available. So, bring in people that specialize in that to be able to do workshops with the guys, and also to be able to offer workshops to the general community on those things, because things that not just benefit veterans, but benefit, anybody really. And so I see that being as a space that, our clients can share with the rest of the community, how to do that sort of stuff. And then there's also this bigger picture of veterans in agriculture. It's a really hot topic in the agricultural community, is getting vets employed in agricultural fields. And as I alluded to, that is fraught. It's very difficult because of the challenges in running a small farm. There are a lot of organizations that are excited about it, but there aren't a lot of organizations that are working directly with veterans with data on how it works. And so long term, I see us as having the potential to be able to provide some of those insights on how you do that successfully. So that's kind of where I see it going. We've talked about expanding the farm in other ways, goats and stuff like that, but I don't know if we'll do that I used to raise goats, and I'm not sure that's such a good idea on the site. But yeah, we want to see the garden grow and expand. There's a lot of empty space at Alpha Omega. People who aren't accustomed to looking at a landscape as an opportunity to grow either vegetables or native plants, a lot of times don't see how much space there is. And so one of the things that I'm focused on is, how can we transform some of the underutilized spaces into other types of gardens or into producing other types of things that the clients will eat, which then also transforms their living space into something different. So I feel like I kind of half-answered your question. I don't know if that... So right now we have 5 guys that are on our paid staff. I think between this year and next year, we could pretty easily double that. I think, like I said, we house between 135 and 150 people on our site, and there's talk of opening, a shelter specifically for women combat veterans, which is the fastest growing, unfortunately, the fastest growing segment of the homeless veteran population right now are women from our most recent wars, right? And so, I think we could realistically employ, 10% of the people that we house, which is a pretty big percentage considering the types of issues that folks are dealing with. We're working on some other things, so it wouldn't just all be farm work. So we've got Farron, our kitchen coordinator, is working on some value-added products so that it would include the honey, probably some dried herbs, stuff based in flowers, and then also some like salsas, pepper jelly, hot sauce, stuff like that. And so that's an area that we're going to hopefully expand as well. So guys that may not want to be outside but might want to work in the kitchen. So that's another area for employment in the project. Yeah, I don't know. I have I'm kind of all over the place on sort of how I feel about where we're going. A lot of times it doesn't feel hopeful. Quite frankly, it's very, very difficult because it's a huge problem. And there's, I think enough said. It's a huge problem. One thing that makes me hopeful is that soil, which is the basis of all of this, is very resilient. Right, and so soils are very responsive to change. Rebuilding a good ecosystem a good biological ecosystem is not that hard to do. We were able to take our farm up to our optimal organic matter percentage in 1 year, right? Just in good practice. It's not perfect, right? We still don't have everything we want, but it can change pretty quickly. And so, that at least is hopeful. Is that I think that if we make the right choices, the earth is typically responsive to what we want. The other thing that makes me hopeful is, farmers occupy this weird social and political space in this country, and I think there's a lot of stereotypes of what farmers are like and how they vote and all of these things that are maybe misunderstood. I know this sounds like I'm kind of going off the rails a little bit, but so when I go to a farm conference, talking about this kind of stuff, we see, very left-wing, sort of like crunchy hippie folks, very, very conservative folks, whether they're, just sort of traditional rural America conservative or, Amish folks, folks like me that kind of occupy no space really, that are just interested in this for whatever reason, academics, all that sort of stuff. But they can come together and have these conversations, right? That to me is hopeful for the sort of the future of our agricultural system and for America, is that farmers sort of buck the normal trends about these things. And so when I say that to say, I can have this conversation with a farmer that's using these pesticides, right? That's a conversation that I've had. I have family that farms using pesticides and stuff like that. And I don't think they're doing it because they're ideologically driven to do it or that they don't believe it's bad. They're doing it because they want to save their farms, right? Because it's the method that's been taught to them to maintain their family's property, and that's important to them. So I've also seen a willingness to change to consumer demand, right? So like I showed with the farmer in the Dakotas that switched over to save his farms, I think farmers are interested in that if the demand is there to do it. Some of it is going to take political will to make that change. And that's a much harder conversation to have, right? Because farm policy is very, very difficult. But I think a lot of people are weighing emphasis because, like you said, it's not just that it's affecting, cheap processed food is hurting people's diets in the city, right? Farmers are reckoning with the fact that their kids are getting cancers from being exposed to these things, right? And so they're not oblivious to the realities either. And so, I think that gives me hope. But the biggest thing is that it's going to take some effort to get people to do this, right? So buying food in this way is less convenient than going to the grocery store. It just is. And so people have to make a commitment to taking a little bit more time to think about their food and how it's being produced and where they're getting it from in order to make those types of changes. Some of these organizations like New South and Bring It are bridging that convenience gap a little bit, but it's still going to take some active, I'm going to take some time out of my day to be thinking about this and do that. And that's just up to all of us that buy produce to do, quite frankly. But when I look at it that way, I still feel hopeful about it because, I'm at the farmer's market every week. And even though it is taking up people's Saturdays, people are out there with their kids and they're happy about it, right? So I've been doing it long enough now to watch my friends' kids grow up at the farmer's market or on farms, right? And see that it's not just this I've got to take this extra time out of my day to go find this food, but it's, really building a community at the same time that people are excited about. But it's still a long way to go. It's still a really long way to go. Yeah. I'll definitely check that out. Yeah, the Big Little Farm. Yeah, the last thing that I would say on that, on what needs to happen, is that there has to be a cultural shift towards how we feel about farming and farmers, right? So to recognize that it's not only difficult work, right? Everybody recognizes that it's difficult, hard work, but that it's also intellectually challenging and dignified work, right? I find it, hands down, any day of the week, more challenging than teaching philosophy, right? From every level, both the physical level and the mental level. And I think part of the conversation has to be renewing our respect for farmers and what they do, right? Because, it's hard work, so.
I'm glad that we have an opportunity to discuss current events as part of our worship in our institution at church. Chris is amazing, and I so appreciate you coming and just sharing candidly what your life is. And there's a possibility that we could visit the farm this summer if people are interested. Let me know. And if Sandy here, he would tell us we need to get to church right now. Thanks, everyone.